Alright, so what I did here was I labeled stanza 1, and stanza 1 is all of these 6 lines right here. So stanza 1 goes all the way from once upon to nothing more. Stanzas are like the paragraphs in poetry, and if you want you can go ahead and label all of our worksheets. So down here is stanza 2, and on the back side of the paper is stanzas 3 and 4. If you notice, I labeled right here, this is line 1, so each of these stanzas here is 6 lines. I just labeled line 1 so you would know. What separates poetry from other kinds of writing is that each line ends wherever you want it to. So it's as long as you want, and you don't have to go anywhere past that. So the first thing I'm going to do, and what I've already done for you, is I chunked out the text. I chunked the first 2 lines, lines 3 and 4, and then lines 5 and 6. So when we're looking at this, the reason why I chunked it this way was because this second line ended with a dash, which is kind of like an extended comma. This fourth line ended in a period, and then the last line also ended in a period. There's another dash right here, but I did notice that it's continuing what someone is saying, what the speaker is saying, so I didn't do anything there. Alright, now I'm going to read with my highlighter and highlight the words and phrases that I'm unfamiliar with. So I'm going to start with once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, only this and nothing more. Now that I have my highlights, now I can go through and start reading and coming up with those words and phrases that are synonyms for my highlighted words, and then also coming up with ideas that I have about different parts of the text. So the first thing I notice when I see this, I see once upon, and that reminds me of a fairy tale. So when I think of like once upon, I think once upon a time. So maybe this has something to do with a fairy tale. But then it says a midnight dreary. So midnight, probably not the best time for someone during the 1800s, because this poem was written in the mid 1800s. So not the best, more than likely. So when I think of midnight, I think of like dark. Right? So that's a word that goes along with midnight. Dreary. Dreary means like depressing. So I'm going to write depressing. And then it says, while I pondered. So pondered means to think. And how is he pondering? It says weak and weary. So it's obviously not the happiest person. Weary means tired. So he's weak and tired. And what is he pondering about? Many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore. That's quaint here means unusual. A volume isn't like your TV volume, right? TV, it's like your it's like a book here. Like a volume, many volumes of books. And then forgotten lore. Lore is like stories or knowledge. So let me see now if I can write what my number 1 is. So once upon a midnight dreary is like saying one sad midnight And then I'm going to put weak and weary in front of pondered. So, while I was weak and tired, I thought. And then instead of over, I'm going to say, because usually you don't think over things, you think about things. So I thought about many unusual and interesting books of forgotten stories. So that's what I'm going to put for number 1. Now I'll move over so you can see what I just spent all that time writing. So I'll read it one more time for you. It says, one sad midnight, while I was weak and tired, I thought about many unusual and interesting books of forgotten stories. Alright, now I'm looking at 2, and I notice this I is the same I that happened before, so I know I in a poem, I'm going to write this up here, but I in a poem is called the speaker. And right here, the I, it says nodding. So I nodded, nearly napping. So I'm going to put some Z's right here. Right, so he's falling asleep. Suddenly there came a tapping. So we have a tapping. And where is the tapping? As of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. So I know that someone's tapping at his chamber door. And I think rapping just means to, not like rap like the way we think about it, but rap just means to hit to make sound. And you can think it's kind of like to knock. And then chamber is just another word for room. So he's saying, while I was falling asleep, suddenly I heard a tapping as if someone was knocking at my door. So let's go ahead and move over and write that. So while I was falling asleep, I heard a tapping as if someone was knocking at my door. When we see the word chamber, I think of like a really big house. So this person's probably rich. So I'm going to put a little money sign there too. Now let's go ahead and look at what he says. He says, "'Tis some visitor." And I didn't highlight "'tis," but it was in Romeo and Juliet. So it says, "It's some visitor." I muttered. So muttered means to basically whisper to yourself. "It's some visitor," I whispered to myself, tapping at my chamber door, "only this and nothing more." So when he says this, he's talking about the visitor tapping at his chamber door. So what I can go ahead and do now is I can take that and I can write it over here. And I'll say, I whispered to myself, "It's a visitor knocking at my door, only a visitor. And we don't really say nothing more, so I'm going to say nothing else here. And that'll probably come up again later on in the stanzas. Now we're going to look at the matter section, and for the matter section you're looking for the following 3 things. So we're going to look for negative diction, and that means word choice. So we're looking for negative words. We're also looking for internal rhyme, and then for end rhyme. So those are the 3 things we're looking for: negative diction or word choice, internal rhyme, and end rhyme. We'll go line by line in stanza 1 and pick out I'll start with the negative word choices. And what I'm going to do for the negative word choices, I'm going to put a little minus next to it. And I want you to put the little minus next to it, but I also want you to write it over in the matter section over there. So a few ones that I noticed right away: I see midnight, that's a negative word; dreary, that's a negative; weak is another negative word; and weary is another one. So those are 4 negative words all in the same line. And you might say, Mr. Kingsland, why is midnight a negative word? Well, would you rather be by yourself at 3 in the afternoon or at midnight? Some other negative words that you might see is something like forgotten. No one really wants to be forgotten. And then muttered, because muttered, when I think about muttered, it's usually crazy people talking to themselves. So the next one after that, now that I have all of my negative word choices, now I need to come up with my internal rhyme. An internal rhyme is a rhyme where the word rhymes with another word in that same line or not at the end of another line. So here I'm going to show you in line 1, and I'm going to do it by circling. So dreary is an internal rhyme with the word weary. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to make a line that connects those two. Right, so once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary. So that's an internal rhyme right there. You need to write those 2 words over on the right side. Now the next time I see an internal rhyme, I don't see any in that second line. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping. So now in line 3, I see napping and tapping. Those 2 rhyme. And then in line 4 it says, as of someone gently rapping. So rapping rhymes with napping and tapping. So I'm going to go ahead and connect those. Right, now that I have the internal rhymes, so dreary, weary, napping, tapping, and rapping, now I need to come up with the end rhyme. So I'm only going to look at this last part. So I'm going to look at weary, lore, tapping, door, door, and more. So what I see, when I said those, what I heard right away was that lore is one of them. And lore rhymes with door, and then the second door, and then down here it rhymes with more. So I'll just make some more lines, connect these ones, and then I'll write those over on the side over there in my matter section in my end rhyme. This is what your matter section will look like.